You got the grade. Maybe it was an A. Maybe it was the highest score in the class. You walked home with it folded in your bag, already rehearsing how you'd show it. Not because you were proud, but because you needed to see their face when they looked at it. You needed that specific 2-second window where their expression would tell you whether what you did mattered, whether you mattered, and maybe they smiled. Maybe they said good job and went back to what they were doing. And somehow, even with the A in your hand, you walked away feeling like you'd gotten nothing at all. That feeling had a name. You just weren't old enough to know it yet. There's a particular kind of childhood that doesn't look like damage from the outside. No obvious wounds, no dramatic scenes to point to. Just a quiet, persistent experience of almost being seen, almost being enough, almost earning the kind of love that felt unconditional but somehow always came with invisible conditions attached. Children who grow up in that environment don't lose confidence the way most people think. It's not that they stop believing in themselves. It's something quieter and more total than that. They learn, through hundreds of small, unremarkable moments, that what they feel about themselves is the last thing worth listening to. That their own read on a situation, their own sense of I did well or I'm okay, doesn't count until someone outside confirms it. The internal voice gets overruled so many times it eventually stops speaking first. You might recognize this in small ways. The way you finish something and your first thought isn't, I'm proud of this, it's, I wonder what they'll think. The way a compliment lands for about 4 seconds before it evaporates and you're already looking for the next one. The way silence from someone you respect feels indistinguishable from disapproval, even when there's no evidence it is. This isn't vanity. It isn't insecurity in the simple sense. It's the result of a nervous system that was trained very early, that the outside world was the only mirror worth looking into. But here's where it gets more uncomfortable than most people want to sit with. The parent, the teacher, the caregiver who wired this in, they didn't have to be cruel. That's the part most people resist hearing. We want a villain. We want the story to have a clear source of harm we can name and separate ourselves from. But the truth is that quiet disappointment does this. Distracted love does this. Praise that only arrived when performance was high does this. A parent who is present physically but elsewhere emotionally does this. The child didn't experience abuse. They experienced something almost harder. To process love that felt like it had terms, even if no one ever stated them out loud. What gets formed in that space is what psychologists call a contingent self-concept, a sense of identity that can only exist when it's being reflected back by someone else. Think of it this way. Most people develop an internal mirror early in life, a stable sense of this is who I am, that persists whether or not anyone is watching. But when early caregiving is inconsistent or conditional, that internal mirror never fully forms. Instead, the child learns to find themselves in other people's eyes. Every interaction becomes a search not for connection, but for confirmation that they exist and that their existence has worth. Viktor Frankl spent years in conditions designed to strip a person of everything, and what he kept returning to was this: that no one can take away the freedom to decide what something means to you. But that freedom assumes something. It assumes you were ever given permission to have an inner world that belonged to you. And that's exactly what wasn't given here. Not through cruelty, through absence, through love that arrived in response to performance and went quiet when there was nothing to perform. Nobody around them sees it. That's the thing. In relationships, people who grew up this way often find themselves doing a kind of constant emotional labor that never gets acknowledged because it was never asked for. They read the room before they enter it. They adjust their energy, their opinions, sometimes their entire personality, to match what they sense is needed. Not because they're manipulative, but because staying attuned to others was once the only way to feel safe. And it worked, until it became the only way they knew how to exist. At work, they are often the most capable people in the room and the least able to feel it. They finish the project, receive the recognition, and feel for a moment that hollow relief of having performed well. Not joy, relief. The difference between those two things is the entire distance between a life that is lived and a life that is managed. And internally, there is a specific kind of tiredness that comes with this pattern. Not physical, something deeper. The tiredness of being the only one who knows how much effort goes into appearing like everything is fine, of waking up and immediately, before you've even fully surfaced from sleep, scanning, is there anything I've missed? Anyone I've disappointed? Anything left to fix? That vigilance was never a character flaw. It was the most intelligent response available to a child who needed to stay ahead of unpredictability. The problem is the child grew up, and the vigilance didn't get the news. At some point, usually after one relationship or achievement, too many, has failed to deliver the feeling they were chasing something shifts, not dramatically, quietly. A question surfaces that they've been outrunning for years, not, why don't people love me enough? But something harder, who am I when no one is watching? That question feels like emptiness the first time it arrives. It isn't. It's the first honest thing. It's the sound of a self that got buried under performance finally asking if it's safe to come up. You were never broken. You were just taught that you needed permission to exist. And somewhere along the way, you believed it. The work isn't becoming someone new. It's remembering that you were always someone before the grades, before the approval, before you learned to make yourself small enough to be loved.